Night sits on the slopes of Mount Cithaeron, and the pine trees stand without any wind. Pentheus, the young king of Thebes, climbs the tallest pine, one hand over the other. The crown of Pentheus lies forgotten on a rock below, catching a thin edge of moonlight. From the high branches, Pentheus can see the whole clearing opened out beneath him. Women move between the fires down there, and not one of them is sleeping. The women wear fawn skins across their shoulders and carry long staffs wrapped in ivy. These women walked out of Thebes days ago and have not come back since. Their looms sit cold in the city, and their doors were left open behind them. One woman lifts a torch, and the light climbs the trunk toward Pentheus above. Pentheus holds his breath and presses himself flat against the wood of the pine. Agave stands near the closest fire and turns her head slowly toward the tree line. Agave is the mother of Pentheus, and her son is hiding in the branches above her. The eyes of Agave are open too wide, and the smoke does not make her blink. Agave raises one arm, points up at the pine, and every voice in the clearing stops. Every face turns upward at once, and the fires burn on with nobody tending them. Leave that mountain for a moment and travel north to the plains of Thrace. Lycurgus, king of the Edonians, walks his own vineyard with an axe across his shoulder. The vines around Lycurgus are cut low, and their leaves have already gone brown. Women run ahead of Lycurgus toward the sea, dropping baskets along the stony road. Lycurgus lifts the axe over a green shoot rising beside a fallen wall. What stands in front of that blade is not a vine, and the field goes quiet. Now the Aegean, blue and flat, with a merchant ship running east under one sail. Tyrrhenian sailors crowd the deck around Dionysus, who lets them rope him to the mast. The ropes lie coiled at his feet, and nobody on board remembers seeing them fall. Dark wine spreads across the boards, though no jar has been opened on that ship. A vine climbs the mast and opens its leaves against the sail like a hand. Something large roars below the deck, and the helmsman alone stays at his post. The sailors along the rail look down at the water and begin throwing themselves over. Then, a throne room in Thebes, with dust in the light, and the door is standing open. The throne is empty, and a woman's sandal lies on the stone steps below it. Ivy has come through a crack in the wall and reached the arm of the chair. 3 different lands, 3 different rulers, and the same green leaf over all of them. Now walk any Greek town at sunset, past the workshops and the drying nets. Near the edge of that town stands a small altar wrapped in the same dark ivy. A farmer sets a bowl of new wine on the altar stone and steps back. The farmer does not linger to pray, and he does not look back on the road home. A potter leaves a cup there before a voyage, still wet from his own wheel. A mother carries her son past the altar and moves him to her other side. The bowls are found empty in the morning, and nobody asks who drank from them. These were not gifts of love, and the people leaving them were not celebrating. Most people today meet Dionysus through painted cups and cheerful drinking songs. Museum cases show Dionysus as a soft young man with grapes tangled in his hair. Later centuries handed Dionysus a wine cup, a laugh, and a crowd of dancing satyrs. The Romans called him Bacchus and made his rites an excuse for a good evening. Painters gave Dionysus rosy cheeks and a leopard skin thrown over one bare shoulder. That version fits comfortably on a wine label in any shop on any street today. The Greeks who built those altars would not recognize that portrait at all. In Athens, the largest stone theater in the city stood on ground belonging to Dionysus. Thousands of citizens sat on that hillside in daylight, whole families together, children among them. They watched a play about Dionysus walking into a city that refused to know him. The mask on that stage smiled through the whole performance and never once changed. Athenian fathers brought their sons to it the way we take children to a festival. That play ends with a family destroyed, and Dionysus watching from above without pity. Dionysus arrived in a city as a stranger, smiling, asking for very little at first. He wore a plain traveler's cloak and kept his hair long in the foreign style. Dionysus asked only that the city admit what he was, and he asked once. Cities that refused him woke to find their daughters gone from the looms by morning. Dionysus never brought an army to a wall, and never needed a siege engine. His weapon opened the gates from the inside the heads of the people behind them. Compare that with Ares, whose shrines across Greece stayed rare and plain. A soldier could see Ares coming from the ridge, dust rising above the road. Spears could be counted, walls could be raised, and a heavy gate could be shut. Against Dionysus there was no gate anywhere, and every wall faced the wrong way. A city could hold out through a 2-year siege and lose everything in one night. The men on the walls stayed at their posts, while the danger walked out the back door. The stories ahead were told at public festivals, in daylight, to ordinary families. Lycurgus of Thrace reached for an axe, and the harvest failed across his whole country. 3 sisters in Orchomenus stayed at their looms, while the entire town walked out. A crew of pirates saw a wealthy young man on the sand, and saw only money. Pentheus of Thebes wanted nothing more than to watch the women of his city dance. Every one of them made the same small decision at the same kind of moment. They looked directly at Dionysus and decided he was not what he claimed to be. To understand those punishments, start with the way Dionysus entered the world. Dionysus was born twice, and the first birth left only ash on a palace floor. His mother was Semele, a mortal girl in Thebes who asked one question too many. Zeus carried the unborn child sewn inside his own thigh for 3 months. Dionysus grew up hunted, hidden in a girl's dress, driven out of his mind across 2 continents. He learned madness from the inside, long before he ever used it on anyone else. That is the detail the wine cups leave out, and it explains everything that follows. Back on Kithaeron, the torches are moving, spreading around the base of the pine. The women climb without hurry, and the ivy staffs come up in their hands. Pentheus in the branches finally understands what he has been watching all night. Pentheus opens his mouth to call down to Agave and say her name aloud. Far below in Thebes, the guards at the gate hear nothing from the mountain. The vineyards on the lower slopes hold still, and not one leaf moves on them. What happened on that mountain kept Greek audiences returning to the story for generations. Before that night, there is a palace in Thebes, a girl, and a promise made in the dark. Thebes stands new in the morning light, its walls still pale where the stone was cut. Cadmus walks the top of those walls and looks down at the streets he laid out. Cadmus built this city from nothing, on ground where nobody had lived before him. Cadmus has 4 daughters, and the youngest of them is standing at the well below. Her name is Semele, and Semele is the only mortal woman in this whole story. Semele carries water back through the gate with her hair loose in the heat. Above the roofs of Thebes, a shadow crosses the courtyard, with no bird in the sky. That night, Zeus is standing inside the room of Semele in the shape of a man. Zeus keeps his back to the lamp, and his face stays outside the light. Zeus tells her his name, and the flame leans toward him without any drought. Zeus comes back the next night, and the night after that one as well. Zeus never arrives through the door, and the guards on the stairs see nobody pass. Semele wakes each morning alone, with the smell of storm air in the room. By the 3rd month, the sisters of Semele are watching her waste across the courtyard. They ask who the father is, and Semele gives them the name of Zeus. One sister laughs into her sleeve and turns back to her weaving. Another repeats the answer at the market, and the market repeats it back louder. The story around Thebes becomes simple. Some man came in the dark and left. Cadmus hears his own daughter called a liar in his own city by his own people. Cadmus builds an altar for Semele anyway and tells the household to stay quiet. Semele sits alone in the garden with one hand resting on her stomach. High on Olympus, Hera hears the name of a mortal girl in Thebes. Hera has heard this kind of news before, and her face does not move at all. The other gods look away from Hera and find reasons to leave the hall. Hera does not reach for a weapon, and Hera does not raise her voice. Hera has learned that a question travels further than any spear ever thrown. Hera comes down toward Thebes without a chariot, without an escort, without any noise. In a side street below the palace, an old nurse appears with a bundle of wool. The hands of the old nurse are spotted, and everybody in that street walks past her. This is the shape Hera chooses, an old nurse from a town near the coast. The servants let the old nurse through the gate, because she knows the household names. The old nurse sits beside Semele in the shade and works the wool in her fingers. The old nurse asks about the man who visits, gently, the way an old woman asks. Semele answers proudly, and the wool keeps turning in the old hands beside her. The old nurse nods slowly and says she has seen girls told this before. She has a story about a sailor who used the name of Zeus in the dark. She mentions another girl in another city who believed a stranger and was wrong. Semele stops smiling and looks over at the gate that Zeus never enters. The old nurse suggests something reasonable, and that is exactly why it works. Ask him for proof, she says. Ask to see him the way his wife sees him. Ask Zeus to come to you as he comes to the throne on Olympus. Semele repeats the words under her breath, and the old nurse gathers up her wool. The bent figure leaves the courtyard, and no servant can say which way she went. That night Zeus arrives, and Semele does not go to meet him first. Semele asks Zeus to promise her one thing before she says what it is. Zeus agrees easily, the way a man agrees to a small favor. Semele asks him to swear it by the black river that runs under the world. The room goes cold, and the lamp gutters low against the far wall. That oath binds gods, and no god has ever broken it and stayed whole. Zeus swears, and only then does he ask her what she wants from him. Semele tells him, and for a long moment Zeus says nothing at all. Zeus turns his face into the light, and it is the face of a man trapped. Zeus begs her to choose something else, anything else, and Semele does not move. Zeus tells her she has asked for the one gift he cannot survive giving. Semele hears a jealous man making excuses, and she holds to her question. Zeus walks out into the courtyard, and the sky over Thebes begins to change color. Wind arrives first, flat and hot, and the shutters slam along the whole street. Dogs go under the benches, and the horses pull against their ropes in the stable. Zeus tries to come gently, choosing the smallest fire he keeps for this. Even the smallest fire of Zeus was never made for a mortal room. Semele stands in the doorway and watches the cloud come down over her roof. For one moment, Semele sees exactly what she asked to see, and she does not look away. The light in the courtyard turns white, and the stones throw shadows straight up the walls. Servants across the city drop down and cover their faces with their arms. From the far hills, Thebes looks like one house burning in the middle of a dark plain. When the light goes out, there is nothing standing in that doorway at all. The palace roof is gone, and fine ash drifts down onto the courtyard tiles. In the middle of the burning floor, something small is still moving in the heat. One tradition says green shoots came up through the stones and closed over the child. Dionysus is 6 months made inside her, and far too early to live. A hand comes down through the smoke and lifts Dionysus out of the fire. Zeus carries his son out of the ruin of a house he burned himself. There is nowhere on earth safe enough, because Hera is already sending questions ahead. So Zeus opens his own thigh and hides Dionysus inside his body. Golden clasps close over it, and Zeus begins to walk with a limp. Olympus watches Zeus favor one leg on the stairs and asks nothing about it. Hera passes Zeus in the hall each day and looks only at his face. Down in Thebes, Hera sends men through the ruins to search the ash for bones. They find Semele, they find no child, and they report the house empty. 3 more months pass, and Zeus keeps crossing the marble carefully. Then, Zeus goes alone to a mountain in the east where nobody keeps watch. Zeus loosens the clasps under a tree and finishes what Semele began. Dionysus comes into the world a second time, alive, whole, and full term. Dionysus is the only one on Olympus carried by a mortal and by a god. The Greeks gave Dionysus a title in their hymns that simply meant twice born. Nobody else in that pantheon ever needed a word like that for a birth. Back in Thebes, the burnt ground is fenced off and left exactly as it fell. Smoke still rises from those stones years later, and nobody crosses the line. Vines come up around the ruin on their own and cover the blackened tiles. The sisters of Semele walk past it daily and tell visitors she invented her god. They say a mortal man came in the night, and Cadmus made up the rest. That sentence will cost them everything, and Agave will pay for it on a mountain. Dionysus is alive, and Hera has not stopped looking for him yet. The next people who hide Dionysus will learn what it costs to keep him. A newborn lies in the crook of the arm of Zeus on a slope above the tree line. Olympus is closed to Dionysus because Hera walks those halls every day. Zeus calls for Hermes and hands the bundle across without explaining anything. Hermes takes Dionysus down the mountain before the light reaches the valley floor. Hermes crosses the water by morning and comes to a palace on the coast of Boeotia. Ino lives there, sister of Semele, aunt to the child in his arms. Hermes sets Dionysus in her hands and gives Ino one instruction only. "Raise him as a girl," says Hermes, "and let nobody in this house say otherwise." Ino cuts a small dress from her own cloth that same afternoon. Ino braids the hair of Dionysus the way the servants braid her daughter's hair. Athamas, her husband, agrees, and the household learns a new name for a new niece. Dionysus grows up in the women's rooms, among looms, combs, and closed doors. Dionysus learns before he can speak that surviving means wearing a face that is not his. Nobody in that palace explains the difference between a disguise and a weapon. High above, Hera looks down at a Boeotian courtyard and counts the children. Hera sees 3 where the household of Athamas should only have 2. Hera does not travel to that house, and Hera does not knock on its door. Hera sends what she sent to Thebes, and this time she sends it indoors. Athamas goes out at first light with his dogs and his hunting spear ready. Athamas looks across his own courtyard and sees a young stag standing by the steps. The dogs will not move, and the servants back away toward the wall behind them. The elder son of Athamas stands exactly where the stag is, and calls his father. Athamas raises the spear, and a servant turns a small child's face into her skirt. The dogs run out through the gate, and nobody calls them back that morning. Inside the palace, Ino hears the sound from the courtyard and does not go out. In the kitchen, a cauldron stands over the flames, and Ino is smiling at it. A cook drops a bowl on the tiles and runs for the door without looking back. What happens in that room happens behind a shut door and one column of steam. Ino comes out with her younger son in her arms and walks through the gate. Ino takes the coast road, and the household follows at a distance, calling her name. The road ends at a white cliff above deep water on the Megarian shore. Ino does not slow down at the edge, and the sea closes over both of them. The people on the path stop where the grass ends and stare at the water. One tradition says the sea gods took Ino in and gave her another name. Sailors after that called her the White Goddess and looked for her in the spray. Ino rose beside breaking ships and pushed drowning men toward the shore herself. A woman punished for hiding one child spent the rest of time saving strangers. That was the price of the first house that opened its door to Dionysus. Back in the palace, the small figure in the girl's dress is already gone. Zeus lifts Dionysus out before the eye of Hera moves and changes his shape. A young goat blinks in the grass, and that goat is the son of Zeus. Hermes carries Dionysus east again, further than Hera bothers to keep watch. There is a valley called Nyssa with water in it and no road leading in. The nymphs who live there take Dionysus and ask nobody where he came from. Silenus comes with them, half asleep, a tutor who teaches nothing useful. Dionysus grows up in a cave above the valley, with rain on the rock outside. Dionysus runs with the goats on the slope and learns which plants are safe. Nothing hunts him in that place, and no messenger from Thebes ever finds it. On the hillside below the cave, a plant grows that nobody has bothered to name. It climbs whatever it touches and turns its flat leaves toward the sun. In late summer, its fruit goes dark and heavy and splits open in the heat. Dionysus crushes a handful into a wooden bowl and leaves it standing in the shade. Dionysus comes back days later, and what is in the bowl has changed by itself. Dionysus drinks it, and the nymphs watch him laugh at nothing for an hour. Dionysus gives it to Silenus, and the old man sleeps in the grass until evening. Dionysus carries the same bowl down to a village at the mouth of the valley. Farmers who have never smiled at a stranger sit and talk until the fire dies. Old men tell the truth about themselves for the first time in 20 years. 2 enemies leave the table with their arms across each other's shoulders. The same bowl, passed to the wrong man, ends with a fight out in the road. In one evening, Dionysus learns that the drink only opens what is already there. That is not a discovery about fruit, and Dionysus understands it before he is grown. Word about the strange boy and the strange plant travels along the trade roads. It reaches the mountain where Hera has been waiting years for exactly this. Hera comes to Nyssa on a clear day, and the water in the valley goes still. Hera does not raise a hand against him because she has never needed to. Hera takes the one thing that Zeus never thought to hide inside a thigh. Dionysus stands in the middle of that valley and cannot remember his own name. Dionysus walks out of Nyssa before dark and keeps walking for a very long time. The nymphs follow Dionysus to the edge of the valley and cannot turn him around. Dionysus crosses the desert road into Egypt with dust standing to his knees. Dionysus sits under enormous stone tombs and talks to people who are not there. Farmers by the river give bread to a young man who cannot say where he is going. Dionysus walks the coast, then the river, then the dry hills east of it. Dionysus goes north through Syria and up into the cold highlands of Phrygia. Dionysus sleeps in ditches, and the dogs of those towns follow him without barking. For years, nobody who passes him on the road sees anything but a madman. Dionysus learns the whole shape of it from underneath, with no way to look out. In Phrygia, there is a mountain with an old goddess inside it, and drums outside. Rhea sits in a hall of raw stone with lions lying on either side of her chair. Her women bring Dionysus in from the road and set him down in front of her. Rhea is the mother of Zeus, and Rhea knows her own grandson at once. Rhea washes him, and the noise in his head goes quiet for the first time. Dionysus sleeps a full day and night on the floor of that hall without moving. When Dionysus wakes, Rhea teaches him what nobody on Olympus would have taught. Rhea gives him the drums, the cymbals, the fawn skin, and the crown of green leaves. Rhea teaches him the rites of her mountain, the dances, the processions after dark. Dionysus learns how a crowd moves when the drums change speed underneath it. Dionysus learns how far a mind will travel before it stops finding its way back. Nobody else on Olympus has been that far out and returned holding a map. Ares learned war from soldiers, and Athena learned strategy in her father's head. Dionysus learned his weapon by being the target of it for years. Dionysus comes down from that mountain, grown, clear-eyed, carrying a pine-tipped staff. Behind him, on the road, walk women with drums who left their houses to follow. Dionysus turns west toward the sea, and the countries where nobody knows his name. The first ship that Dionysus steps onto belongs to men who make their living taking people. A headland runs out into the sea on the coast of Ionia in the late afternoon. Dionysus stands on the sand at the end of it and looks east at nothing. Dionysus wears a dark cloak over his shoulders and keeps his hair long down his back. Dionysus has no bag, no horse, and nobody waiting for him on the road behind. Out beyond the point, a low ship comes around the rocks under oars. The men at those oars are Tyrrhenian, and they trade in whatever the coast leaves unguarded. The lookout sees a figure alone on an open beach with no village in sight. The lookout calls down the deck, and the rowing changes rhythm at once. The captain reads the cloak first, then the hair, then the empty sand around Dionysus. Good cloth on a young body means a family somewhere with money to send. The ship turns in toward the shallows, and the oars go quiet near the shore. Sailors come over the side into the water and walk up the beach without hurrying. Dionysus watches the sailors come and does not move his feet at all. They take Dionysus by both arms, and he lets them, and that is the first strange thing. Nobody on that crew has ever taken a captive who forgot to struggle. They carry Dionysus aboard, sit him on the deck, and reach for the heavy rope. The knots go on tight around his wrists and again around his ankles. The crew stands back to look at their morning's work and starts calculating prices. Then the rope on his wrists opens by itself and falls in a loose coil. The men look at the deck, and the knots at his ankles are already lying flat. A young sailor picks up the rope and finds no cut and no fray in it. They tie Dionysus again with a longer line and a knot used for holding cargo. That knot opens as well, and the whole coil slides across the boards toward the rail. Dionysus sits exactly where they put him, with his hands resting on his knees. Dionysus has not spoken since the beach, and he is looking at the captain now. At the stern, the helmsman takes one hand off the steering oar and stares. The helmsman is older than the rest and has watched weather come in for 30 years. The helmsman walks the length of the deck and tells the crew to put Dionysus ashore. He says the ropes are answering to somebody, and no rope does that alone. The helmsman names the ones this could be, and every name he says is a god. He tells them to set the young man on the sand with a gift and row away. The captain laughs at the helmsman in front of the whole crew and points south. The captain says the boy is worth a house in Cyprus if they run him quickly. He says the wind is good, and gods do not travel on merchant ships in the afternoon. The captain tells the helmsman to hold the course and to keep his mouth shut. The sail goes up and the ship leans over and starts moving out to open water. The helmsman goes back to his oar and does not look at anyone again. Dionysus turns his head to watch the coastline get smaller behind them. Nothing happens for 1 hour, and the crew begins to breathe normally again. Then, a sailor near the mast steps in something wet and looks down at his foot. Dark liquid is running along the boards, filling the seams between the planks. It comes from nowhere, and the smell of it goes through the whole ship. It is wine, and it is warm, and there is no jar anywhere on this vessel. It reaches the low end of the deck and pools around the feet of Dionysus. 2 sailors run below to check the cargo and find the hold completely dry. On deck, the sail is changing color above their heads while they are gone. A vine has come up out of the boards and taken hold of the mast. The vine winds up the wood with its leaves opening flat against the canvas. Grapes hang black and heavy where the rigging used to run clean to the yard. Dark leaves spread along both rails and close over the oar ports one by one. A tree pushes up through the middle of the deck and lifts its branches over the sail. The crew backs toward the stern and stands together in the only clear space left. The captain shouts an order about the sail, and nobody moves to obey it. Then the sound starts, low, from somewhere near the mast, under the leaves. It is not a man's voice, and it is not any animal that lives on a ship. It comes again, closer, and the boards take the weight of something heavy. The leaves at the mast move apart, and what steps out of them is not a man. A lion stands on the deck of a merchant ship in the middle of the sea. Its head is turned toward the men at the stern, and it is not in a hurry. Nobody counts the distance because there is nowhere on that ship to go. The sailors look over the rail at the water, and the water looks like the only door. The first one goes over the side without saying anything to the men beside him. The second and third follow him, and after that, the rail empties fast. The captain is the last to stand there, and the captain goes over too. The sea beside the ship is full of splashing men, and then it is not. Something dark breaks the surface, arcs over, and goes back under without a sound. Then another, and another, until the ship is riding in a ring of moving backs. They are dolphins now, and they will be dolphins for the rest of time. They swim beside the hull and lift their heads toward the deck they left. The men who wanted a house in Egypt got the open sea and a new shape. One tradition says they follow ships to this day, looking for the deck they lost. Sailors have thrown them fish ever since, and no Greek crew would harm one. The helmsman is still at his oar with both hands on the wood, alone. The helmsman does not look at the water and does not let go of the steering. Behind him, the lion is gone, and Dionysus is standing where the lion stood. Dionysus tells the helmsman to stop being afraid, because he was the one who saw. Dionysus gives him his name, and the ship goes very quiet around that name. He says his mother was Semele of Thebes, and his father was Zeus. The helmsman lets go of the oar and sits down on the deck. The vine is still on the mast, and the wine has gone from the boards. Dionysus tells the helmsman the ship is his, and the course is his to choose. Dionysus steps off the deck onto the water, and the leaves close behind him. That story was carved on cups and sung at ports around the whole Aegean. Fishermen told it to boys who were thinking about a life at sea. The lesson in it was never about wine, and every listener understood that. The warning came first, from an old man, spoken clearly, in front of everyone. It cost nothing to take, and it was refused because the money looked better. Dionysus does not test people, and he does not arrange complicated traps for them. Dionysus shows up plainly, waits, and lets a man decide in daylight. The helmsman heard the same words the captain heard, and steered a different life. Everything that happens to the kings in this story happens after a warning like that. The next warning goes to Lycurgus of Thrace, who owns land and an army. Lycurgus is given his warning at the edge of his own vineyard by the sea. North of the Aegean, the coast turns cold and the rivers come down out of the mountains. A wide river called the Strymon reaches the sea between low hills and black pine. The land here belongs to the Edonians, and their king is Lycurgus. Lycurgus is not a small king, and his territory runs from the river to the coast. The hall of Lycurgus stands above the water, with hunted heads fixed along the walls. Lycurgus counts his years by campaigns, and his wealth by the fields beside the river. Lycurgus has one son, Dryas, who is learning to ride in the yard. Dryas runs out to meet him whenever the hunting party comes back through the gate. A messenger arrives from the coast road while Lycurgus is eating in his hall. He says a crowd came off a ship at the shore 2 days ago. Women with drums are walking inland, and the local women are leaving their houses. They carry pine staffs wound with green and dance on ground that belongs to Lycurgus. Lycurgus puts down his cup and asks who let them cross his border. Nobody in the hall answers, because nobody has asked that question about a god before. Out on the hills, the drums are already audible from the walls after dark. The next morning, Dionysus walks up the road to the gate alone. Dionysus wears a foreign cloak and carries no guard, no weapon, and no gift. Dionysus asks the king of the Edonians to let his rights be kept on this land. Dionysus does not raise his voice, and he does not say it a second time. Lycurgus looks at the long hair, the soft cloak, the staff, and the easy smile. Lycurgus sees a foreigner selling drink to women who should be at their looms. Lycurgus calls for his axe and gives an order about the coast road that same hour. By midday, Lycurgus is on the sacred slope with armed men spread out behind him. Lycurgus carries a long ox goad in one hand and the axe across his shoulder. The nurses of Dionysus are up there, with the children of the mountain around them. They see the line of men coming up through the trees and stop dancing. Lycurgus drives them down the slope, the way a farmer drives cattle to water. Their staffs fall on the grass behind them and lie among the trampled leaves. One woman looks back at her staff in the wet grass and keeps running downhill. At the bottom of the hill, the sand begins, and the sea is gray and moving. Dionysus comes down the last of the slope, with armed men close behind him. Dionysus walks into the water without slowing, and the waves close over his shoulders. Under that surface, Thetis takes him in with her sea-gray arms and holds him. Thetis keeps a frightened god in her lap on the floor of the Aegean. The men on the beach stop at the waterline and look at flat, empty water. Lycurgus turns his back on the sea and tells his men the country is clean. His soldiers walk the captured women back up the road with their hands bound. They are shut in a stone building behind the hall, with a guard at the door. Lycurgus sleeps well that night and hears drums somewhere out past his own walls. In the morning, that door is standing open, and the guard is asleep against the wall. Nobody saw anyone leave, and nothing on the floor of that room is cut. That summer, the river drops until the stones in the bed stand dry in the sun. Wheat comes up thin and yellow in the fields along the whole valley. The vines on the terraces above the villages lose their leaves in high summer. Farmers dig beside the river and pull up handfuls of gray dust. Cattle stand in the shade with their heads down and will not eat. Women carry water from further away every week and say nothing at the well. The Edonians look up the hill toward the hall of the king who cleaned his country. Lycurgus walks out of that hall one morning with the axe on his shoulder. Lycurgus has decided the vines are the reason, and the vines will come out today. Lycurgus goes down to the terrace where the oldest planting grows against the wall. What Lycurgus sees in front of him is a green shoot, and it should not be there. Dryas is standing in that row, calling to his father across the dry ground. The men at the top of the terrace start running, and they are far too late. Lycurgus lifts the axe over the vine and brings it down into the row. The running men stop where they are, and one of them turns to face the wall. Wind moves along the terrace, and dry leaves knock against the stone in the quiet. Nobody on that hillside says anything for a long time after the sound stops. Lycurgus is still working when they reach him, clearing the shoot back to the root. Then the noise in his head stops, and the axe gets heavy in his hands. Lycurgus looks down at what is lying in the row and does not know it. A man behind him takes the axe out of his hands, and nobody interferes. They walk Lycurgus back up to the hall between two of his own guards. A small sandal stays in the dust of that terrace until the evening comes. Nothing grows on Adonian land after that day, not that season and not the next. The river stays low, the terraces stay bare, and no rain comes in off the sea. Men walk their fields at dawn and come back with empty hands by noon. The elders send to the oracle and ask how the ground can be released. The answer comes back short, and a messenger repeats it in front of the hall. The land will bear again when the man who brought this on it is gone. The Adonians gather outside the door of Lycurgus, and not one of them argues. They take Lycurgus east to Mount Pangaeum, where the pine ends and bare rock begins. Lycurgus walks up between them without fighting, and without asking them to explain. They bind Lycurgus on the mountain, and bring the horses up the path from below. What happens on Pangaeum happens above the tree line, where nobody stays to watch. The men come back down the path with their hands empty, and the sun going down. By the next spring, the terraces along the Strymon are green from end to end. Children pick fruit in the same rows where Lycurgus once cleared a shoot. Nobody in those villages says his name aloud for a very long time after. Lycurgus had one warning at his own gate from a young man with no guard. Lycurgus answered it with an axe and a border order given in front of his court. Dionysus never touched him, and Dionysus never came back to that country. The axe belongs to Lycurgus from the first scene of that story to the last. Every hand that did damage in Thrace that year was a Thracian hand. That pattern sits under all of these stories and repeats in every city that refuses. Dionysus does not break the door, and he waits outside for the house to open it. The same offer arrives next in a Boeotian town, at a loom, in plain daylight. The daughters of Minyas are working there, and they have decided they are not going. South of the mountains there is a plain in Boeotia that never runs short of water. A city sits on the edge of it, with a stone treasury built into the hillside. Orchomenus grew rich on wool and grain, and its walls went up early. Its people take pride in work, and the looms in that city run all day. Minyas built that treasury, and the name of Minyas is on everything here. The daughters of Minyas live in the family house near the square with shutters closed. There are 3 of them, and every one of them works from morning to dark. Their looms stand side by side in the main room with the wool baskets between. The eldest keeps the counts, and the youngest, Leucippe, has a small son. The boy plays on the floor under the frames while the shuttles go back and forth. Nobody in Orchomenus has a word to say against that house or those women. In the middle of that autumn, a herald walks into the square with a staff. The herald calls the city out for the festival of the new god from the east. He tells them to leave the wool, close the workshops, and go up to the hills. He says the priest wants no loom touched in Orchomenus for 3 days. Word goes house to house before evening, and the shutters open along the street. Women come out with green wound around their arms and fawn skins over their dresses. They carry pine staffs and gather at the gate in the last of the light. The whole city drains out of itself in one afternoon and moves toward the high ground. Drums start above the vineyards, and the sound comes down into the empty streets. 3 windows in that town still have lamps burning behind them after dark. The daughters of Minyas are at their frames, with the shutters shut and the wool high. They have decided this is nonsense, and they say so to each other plainly. 2 of them come from a house that pays for temples and expects them respectable. A god who wants grown women shouting on a mountain is not their kind of god. They agree to work through the whole festival and tell stories to pass the hours. One tells a story about a girl who loved a boy through a crack in a wall. The shuttles keep moving, and the drums outside keep coming in through the shutters. In the 3rd hour, a strange girl none of them knows is standing in the doorway. The strange girl is young and plain, and asks them why they are still working. She tells them to leave the frames and go up the hill with the others. She says it once, in an ordinary voice, and she waits by the door. The eldest sister does not stop her shuttle and tells the girl to go home. Leucippe laughs and says the god can wait until the wool is finished. The girl in the doorway is Dionysus, and Dionysus is not there anymore. What stands in the room now is a bull, and its head fills the low doorway. The lamps blow flat, and the wool baskets tip over across the floor. The bull is gone, and a lion is standing between the middle loom and the wall. Then a spotted cat with a long tail moves along the far side of the room. The sisters are on their feet against the frames, and the door is standing open. The doorway is empty, and the street outside is silent all the way down. Something drips from the ceiling beam and lands on the wool at their feet. It is milk, warm, and it is coming down in 3 places along the roofline. Dark wine runs out of a seam in the plaster and crosses the floor tiles. The smell in the room is honey and green leaves in a house with nothing cooking. Ivy comes up through the floor and takes the leg of the eldest sister's loom. The ivy climbs the frame in front of them and closes over the finished cloth. Vines run along the roof beam and hang down between the women and the door. The threads on the loom go dark, and grapes are hanging where the wool should be. Outside the shut window, the drums are much closer than the hills where they started. Under the floor, something heavy moves, and the roars come from every wall at once. There is no animal in the room, and the sound is walking around them. The lamps go out one by one, and Leucippe starts to laugh. In the dark, the 3 of them stop being the daughters of Minyas at all. The house goes quiet, and the boy who is playing on the floor sits up. They cast lots in that room, the way women cast lots for a household task. The door of the main room is closed from the inside just before dawn. What happened behind it takes less time than the festival still going on outside. Nothing about it was ever put in a picture on a cup or a wall. In the morning, the shutters are open, and the looms stand with the cloth unfinished. Wool lies across the floor tiles in loops from one wall to the other. A small sandal is left under the middle loom beside a spilled basket. The 3 sisters are already outside the city walls, running toward the high ground. They cross the vineyards with their hair loose and green leaves caught in it. The women on the mountain make room for them without asking a single question. They dance until noon among people they refused to walk beside the day before. That was the whole festival they said they were too busy to attend. In the afternoon, Hermes comes up the path with a staff in his hand. Hermes finds 3 women sitting apart from the others in the shade of the rocks. Their eyes are clear now, and one of them is looking down toward her own city. Hermes does not punish them for what they did on that mountain in the morning. Hermes touches each of them with the staff and steps back to let them stand. One tradition says the first became a bat, small and folded, hiding from the light. The second and third went up into the trees as owls with round yellow eyes. They flew away from the sun and away from the smoke of the houses below. From then on, those 3 lived under roofs, in the dark, above rooms full of people. They hate daylight, they avoid open ground, and they are heard more than seen. A family that would not leave its loom was given a life inside the ceiling. The treasury of Minyas still stands on that hillside with a door cut in stone. Tourists walk through it now and read the name of a king above the entrance. Nobody there tells them what happened in the house of his daughters. Orchomenus remembered it every year for centuries in the plainest way possible. At their autumn festival, the priest of Dionysus came out with a sword in his hand. The women of the city ran from him through the streets while the town watched. He was allowed to strike the one he caught, and one tradition says he did. Those women were the descendants of that family, and everybody in the city knew it. The city was not celebrating a harvest, and nobody there thought it was a game. They were paying, in public, once a year, for one night of refused work. 3 women at a loom in a quiet town were not kings and had no army. They were punished exactly as hard as Lycurgus of Thrace with his axe. Dionysus does not scale the answer to the size of the person refusing him. The next city to refuse Dionysus is the city where his own mother was born. The sisters of Semele still live in Thebes and still call her a liar. A road comes down from the north through the passes and reaches the plain of Boeotia. Dionysus walks it in a foreign cloak, with women carrying drums behind him. Dionysus stops where the road turns and looks at the walls of the city ahead. Thebes has 7 gates, and the stone of them is older than anyone living inside. This is the only city in this story where Dionysus was actually born. Dionysus walks off the road to a fenced patch of ground on the edge of town. Inside the fence, the tiles are black, and a wall stands broken at one end. Thin smoke still rises out of the stones after all these years. Vines have grown over the burnt floor and covered the place where a doorway stood. This is the house of Semele, and the city has left it exactly as it fell. Dionysus stands at the fence for a while and then walks up toward the gate. Dionysus goes in as a stranger, a foreigner with long hair and no weapon. Nobody at that gate looks twice at another traveler off the northern road. In the palace above the square, Pentheus is holding a report in his hand. Pentheus is new to the throne and has been ruling this city for a year. Pentheus is the son of Agave, and Agave is a daughter of Cadmus. That makes Dionysus in the street below his cousin, and Pentheus does not know it. The report says, "The women of Thebes are gone, all of them, up the mountain. Agave is up there, and both of her sisters went with her. They left their houses open, their looms loaded, and their children with the servants. Somebody has told them a new god has come, and they belong to him." Pentheus puts the report down and looks at a square full of men only. Pentheus calls the guard captain and gives orders about the roads and the gates. Pentheus wants the mountain surrounded and every woman brought back into the city. Pentheus wants the foreign priest found and put in chains before sunset. Then Pentheus walks out into the courtyard and stops in the middle of it. Cadmus and Tiresias are standing there, dressed for a festival, with green in their hair. Cadmus built this city and is nearly 90 years old. Tiresias is blind and has outlived 4 generations in this town. They wear fawn skins over their shoulders, and each holds a pine staff. They are on their way out of the gate to go up the mountain and dance. Pentheus looks at his grandfather in a fawn skin and covers his face. Pentheus tells them their age makes it worse and asks who dressed them for this. Tiresias says the god does not ask whether a man is young or old. Tiresias tells the king that Dionysus is the son of Semele and Zeus. Cadmus takes his grandson by the arm and asks him one practical question. Cadmus asks what it costs the city to honor a god that may be real. Cadmus says the family already lost one daughter to an argument about this. Pentheus pulls his arm free and orders them both out of his sight. Pentheus sends men to tear down the prophet's seat and scatter the stones. Cadmus stands in the courtyard, holding the hand of Tiresias and watching the boy go. The guards come back at noon, with Dionysus walking easily between them. They put Dionysus in front of the throne and step away without touching him. The captain reports that the man held out his hands for the ropes himself. Dionysus stands in the middle of the floor and looks up at the king. Dionysus is smiling, and he keeps smiling through everything that follows. Pentheus comes down the steps to see the face of the man who emptied his city. Pentheus walks around him once and starts with the hair, then the skin, then the cloak. Pentheus asks where the man is from and hears about a mountain in the east. Pentheus asks about the rites and is told they are not for a man who refuses. Pentheus asks what the god looks like and is told he looks like whatever he wants. Every answer is calm, complete, and useless, and the smile never changes at all. Pentheus asks whether the man has seen this god himself, here, in this room. Dionysus says he is looking at him now, and the guards shift their feet. Pentheus takes it as insolence and orders the long hair cut off first. Pentheus takes the pine staff out of his hand and holds it up. Pentheus tells the guards to lock him in the stone building beside the stables. Dionysus lets himself be led out and does not look back at the throne. The doors close, the bar drops, and the yard outside goes quiet in the heat. Pentheus goes back up to his rooms and orders the army out at dawn. In the stable yard, the horses start pulling against their ropes for no reason. Somewhere inside the palace, a voice says the name of Pentheus once, clearly, from below. The floor of the courtyard moves, and the water in the trough goes over the side. Roof tiles slide off the stable and break in a line across the yard. A crack opens up the front of the stone building from the door to the roof. The lintel comes down, the wall folds outward, and dust goes up over the palace. Guards run out of the gate into the square and stand there looking back. Fire comes up on the burnt ground where the house of Semele has stood for years. The flames rise off the old tiles, and nobody in the city goes near them. Pentheus comes down into the yard with the sword and shouts an order at the ruin. Pentheus runs into the smoke, swinging at something moving between the fallen stones. Pentheus drives the blade into a shape in the dust and pulls it back out. What Pentheus has run through is a patch of air, and the sword is clean. The dust settles, and Dionysus is standing outside the wreck without any rope on him. Dionysus is not dirty, he is not out of breath, and he is still smiling. Dionysus asks the king, politely, how it went in there with the sword. Pentheus stands in his own courtyard, in front of his own guards, and says nothing. Every man in that yard has seen the walls come down and the prisoner walk out. Pentheus could stop here, and both old men in the courtyard are waiting for it. Pentheus looks at the ruin, then at the smoke, then at the road to the mountain. Then a herdsman comes in from Cathaeron with grass still on his legs. The herdsman has come down to report what the women are doing on the ridge. He says they sleep on the ground and wake in order without anyone calling them. He says one of them struck a rock and clean water came up out of it. He says milk comes out of the ground where they scratch it with their fingers. He says the herdsman tried to take Agave back and had to run for the trees. He says the women went through a village below the ridge and nobody stopped them. He says iron does not cut them and fire in their hair does not burn. Pentheus listens to all of it and takes only one sentence out of it. Pentheus hears that his mother is on a mountain shaming his house. Pentheus gives the order to arm the city and march out at first light. Dionysus is still standing there, and now he stops arguing with the king. Dionysus offers him something quieter instead, and he says it almost kindly. Dionysus asks whether the king would rather go up that mountain and see them himself. Pentheus does not answer straight away, and the whole courtyard waits for him. That pause is the last free moment that Pentheus will ever have. The courtyard in Thebes is quiet, and Pentheus stands in front of a smiling Dionysus. Pentheus has been offered the mountain, and he has not said no to it yet. Pentheus asks how much it would cost to see the women of his city up there. Dionysus says nothing about money, and waits with his hands at his sides. Pentheus says he will go, and one of the guards looks at the ground. Dionysus says the ridge is watched, and no armed man walks up that path. Dionysus says the women would see a soldier crossing the open grass at once. Dionysus tells him there is only one way onto that mountain unnoticed. Pentheus would have to go as a woman, in a long dress with his hair down. Pentheus laughs at the idea and turns away toward the palace steps. Pentheus gets 3 steps up and stops with one hand on the wall. Pentheus comes back down and asks quietly what kind of dress it would be. In an upper room, a servant lays out a long linen robe on the bed. Pentheus ordered an army out at dawn and now stands in front of that robe. Pentheus puts it on, and it hangs badly, and the belt sits wrong at his waist. Dionysus kneels and straightens the hem for him the way a mother would. Dionysus arranges the hair and sets a small crown of green leaves on his head. Dionysus puts a pine staff in his hand and closes his fingers around it. Pentheus turns to the polished bronze on the wall and looks at himself in it. Pentheus asks whether he looks more like Agave or more like her sisters. Then Pentheus says there are 2 suns in the sky above the courtyard outside. Pentheus looks at Dionysus and says the man has grown horns since this morning. Pentheus says a bull is walking in front of him and leading him to the door. Dionysus tells him he is seeing clearly now, and Pentheus smiles at that. In the yard below, the guards stand in a line and watch their king come out. Pentheus is worried about the folds of his dress and asks if they hang straight. Pentheus walks the length of his own courtyard, adjusting a sleeve with great care. A boy on the palace steps starts to laugh, and an older man stops him. The gate opens, and Pentheus goes out through his own city in a dress. Men come to their doors along the street, and none of them says a word. Pentheus crosses the square where he gave his orders, and does not recognize it. Cadmus watches from a window and does not call down to his grandson. The road out of the north gate goes up between vineyards toward the ridge. Pentheus and Dionysus walk it alone, with the drums getting louder above them. Pentheus asks whether he could carry the whole mountain on his shoulders. Pentheus asks whether he should hide in the bushes or go straight in among them. Dionysus walks a little ahead of him and answers everything patiently. Halfway up, the noise stops, and the grass on the slope is completely still. They come out of the trees into a wide clearing with tall pines around it. The women are down there between the fires, with their staffs across their knees. Pentheus cannot see them properly from the ground and says so out loud. Pentheus asks for a better view, and Dionysus looks up at the tallest pine. Dionysus takes the top of that tree in one hand and bends it to the grass. The trunk comes over slowly, and its branches lie flat on the ground. Pentheus climbs on, and the pine goes back up and lifts him over the clearing. Pentheus sits in the branches with his dress caught around him and looks down. Dionysus walks out into the middle of the clearing below him and stops. Dionysus is not a foreigner in a cloak anymore, and the fires lean toward him. Dionysus calls the women by name and points up at the tree with one hand. Dionysus tells them, a man has come to laugh at their god and at them. Then Dionysus is not in the clearing at all, and the fires stand straight again. Every woman on that mountain is on her feet and looking up at the pine. Pentheus in the branches finally understands what he has been watching all night. Pentheus tears the crown off his head so that Agave will know his face. Pentheus calls down to her, and he uses her name, and he says he is her son. Agave stands at the front of them, with the firelight on her face. Agave looks up at the tree and sees a mountain lion in the branches. Agave calls the others, and they come across the grass toward the trunk together. They put their hands on the pine, and stones go up from the clearing floor. The tree comes down the way Dionysus bent it, slowly, out of the sky. The torches close in a ring around the base of it, and the light goes low. The clearing sounds like the mountain is moving, and then it sounds like nothing. High above the ridge, the sky is already going gray over the plain. Down in the city, the gates are still shut, and the streets are empty. The vineyards on the lower slopes hold still, and not one leaf moves on them. At sunrise, the mountain path is full of women walking down toward the walls. They are singing, and their arms are marked with ivy and dust and grass. Agave walks in front of all of them with a pine staff held high overhead. Something is fixed at the top of that staff, and Agave carries it like a prize. The gate guards see her coming and step back into the arch without challenging her. Agave comes into the square and calls the city out to look at her hunt. Men come to their doors and stop, and nobody in that square congratulates her. Agave tells them she took it with her bare hands and without any nets. Agave calls for her father and for her son, because a son should see this. Cadmus is coming through the far gate, with servants and a covered litter behind him. Cadmus has been on the mountain since first light, gathering what he found there. Cadmus stops in the middle of the square when he sees the staff of his daughter. Agave holds it higher and asks Cadmus to praise her in front of everyone. Cadmus asks her, very gently, to look up at the sky above the roofs. Agave looks up, and the light on her face is ordinary morning light. Cadmus asks whether the sky seems the same to her as it did yesterday. Agave says it seems clearer, and something in her voice has already changed. Cadmus asks whose house she is standing in front of, and she answers correctly. Cadmus asks who her husband was and her son, and she answers those too. Then Cadmus asks her to look again, slowly, at the thing she is holding. Agave looks at the top of her own staff in front of her whole city. Her arms come down, and the square is completely silent around her. Cadmus takes the staff out of her hands before she can drop it herself. Cadmus puts his cloak over what she carried and holds his daughter upright. Agave asks who did this, and she asks it 3 times, and Cadmus answers. Cadmus tells her the family denied Dionysus, and this is what the denial cost. Servants carry the covered litter past them toward the doors of the palace. The women who came down the mountain are sitting in the dust of the square. Their hair is full of leaves, and none of them can say what they did. Every house in Thebes will keep a story about this morning for 4 generations. A city refused to say one name, and Dionysus let its own queen do the rest. Dionysus never entered the clearing with a weapon, and never touched Pentheus. The hands on that pine belonged to the women of Thebes, and everybody knew it. That is the pattern under every one of these stories, finished in the worst way. What comes next is the only place in the myths where Dionysus breaks nothing. Far south of Thebes, the Aegean opens out into water and scattered islands. Naxos lies in the middle of them, green in the center and dry along the shore. On the eastern side of the island there is a long beach with no houses on it. The sun comes up out of the sea there before it reaches the mainland. Ariadne lies asleep on that sand in the last of the dark. Her cloak is under her head, and her hair has salt dried into it. Ariadne is the daughter of a king, and until last night she was going to Athens. Ariadne wakes because the light is on her face and reaches for the man beside her. Her hand finds sand, and the place where Theseus slept is already cold. Ariadne sits up and looks along the beach in both directions and sees nothing. There are footprints in the wet sand leading down toward the waterline. Ariadne follows them to the edge, and they stop where the water begins. Ariadne looks out at the sea, and there is one sail on it, going east. Ariadne stands in the shallows with her dress soaked to the knee, and does not shout. Ariadne is the woman who saved the Athenian prince in her father's own maze. She gave Theseus thread, she gave him the way out, and she left her country. Her mother, her father, and her brother are on an island she cannot go back to. Theseus is on that sail, and his crew is rowing hard with the morning wind. Ariadne sits down on the sand above the tide line and watches the sail get smaller. When the sea is empty, Ariadne keeps watching the place where the sail was. The gulls come down the beach past her, and she does not move at all. By full daylight, Ariadne is still sitting there with her arms around her knees. Ariadne has no ship, no money, no family, and no name that means anything here. The island behind her has villages in it, and none of them know who she is. In the myths, this is usually where a woman turns into a bird or a spring. Behind Ariadne, further up the beach, the sand has been marked by many feet. There is a road inland from that shore that goes up between the vines. Somewhere above the beach, a drum starts, and then another one joins it. The sound comes down through the trees toward the water, and it is getting closer. Ariadne stands up and turns around, and she is not afraid, only tired. Women come out of the trees onto the sand with green wound around their arms. Behind them are men with pipes and an old man who cannot walk straight. They stop at the edge of the sand, and the drums go quiet on their own. Dionysus walks out of the crowd and comes down the beach alone. Dionysus is not carrying a weapon and has a crown of leaves in his hair. Dionysus stops in front of a woman in a wet dress with red eyes and says her name. Ariadne has never met him and has told nobody on this island who she is. Dionysus asks her nothing about the maze, the thread, the prince, or the ship. Dionysus tells her he came here for her and already knows the whole story. Dionysus does not ask her to prove anything and does not ask her to wait. Dionysus asks her to marry him, on that beach, in front of everyone standing there. In every other story in this video, the answer to Dionysus is no. Ariadne looks past him at the people on the sand and back at his face. Ariadne says yes to a stranger with leaves in his hair on the worst morning. The women come down the beach and put a cloak around her shoulders. Somebody brings water, and somebody else starts working the salt out of her hair. They walk Ariadne up the road inland between the vines toward the high ground. There is a wedding on Naxos that night, with fires along the terraces. Silenus falls asleep sitting up, and the pipes keep going until late. The bride is a foreign princess, and the guests are farmers from the island villages. The gift of Dionysus is a circle of worked gold set with stones that hold light. Ariadne wears it that night, and it sits in her hair like a line of small fires. One tradition says the smith of the gods made it and sent it down for her. Dionysus does not take her to Olympus and hide her in a back room there. Dionysus takes her with him, on the roads, through every country he walks into. Ariadne is on the mountain when the drums start, and she is not a follower. The wedding on Naxos was painted on cups for the next 600 years. Painters put the two of them side by side under a vine with the sea behind. Married couples in Greek towns kept those cups on a shelf for visitors to see. A god who emptied cities was also the household picture of a good marriage. Dionysus had every reason to be the worst husband in the whole pantheon. Zeus took women in the shape of birds and bulls and left them behind. Hera spent her life hunting down the results of what Zeus did. Dionysus grew up as one of those results, hidden in a dress, chased across 2 continents. The man who did the leaving in his own story was the king of the gods. Theseus sailed away from Ariadne while she was asleep on a beach. Every powerful man in her life so far had put her down and walked on. Ariadne stayed with Dionysus, and there is no story about him leaving her. There is no other woman in his myths, and no one ever wrote him one. Dionysus is the only major god in that pantheon with no list of affairs. The same absoluteness runs through both sides of him without changing at all. Dionysus asked Thebes for one thing and destroyed the house that refused it. Dionysus asked Ariadne for one thing and gave her everything after she agreed. Nothing about Dionysus is moderate, and nothing about him is ever partly done. Dionysus is not a kind god, and this story is not evidence that he was. Dionysus does not do anything by halves in either direction. The cost of refusing him is exactly as total as the reward for accepting him. Years later, when Ariadne is old by the measure of mortal women, that ends. One tradition says Ariadne died on the island where she waited for him. Dionysus goes to find her the way he found her the first time, without asking. Dionysus takes the crown from her hair and throws it up out of his hands. It goes higher than a thrown thing should go and does not come down. The stones in it separate and stand apart from each other in the dark. They stop moving, and they stay where they stopped, over the northern sky. Sailors in the Aegean look up and find that half circle above the horizon. Farmers used it to mark the season and never needed a name for it. The Greeks called it the Northern Crown, and it is still called that today. Anyone outside tonight, away from town lights, can find it above the trees. It is a small arc of stars between the herdsman and the head of the serpent. That is a wedding gift from Dionysus, left in the sky, still there. Dionysus put a crown where nobody could ever take it down. There is one more thing Dionysus wants back from the dark, and it is not a crown. It is in the place where nobody negotiates, and he is going down there for it. South of Argos, the road comes down to a marsh where the ground stops being solid. Reeds stand higher than a man there, and the water between them never moves. In the middle of that marsh there is a round pool the locals call Alcyonian. Travelers said no line ever reached the bottom, and no swimmer came back. Cattle drink at the edge of it, and the herdsmen do not follow them in. Local people believe that pool was a door, and they left it alone. Dionysus comes down that road with no crowd behind him for once. Dionysus is not carrying drums, and the women who follow him are somewhere else. At the edge of the water, a man from the village stands among the reeds. He knows these marshes and knows which pool is the one that goes through. One tradition says he showed Dionysus the way in and asked for a promise. Dionysus agreed, and he went down into the water and did not come back up. Above the marsh, the reeds close over the surface, and the birds start again. What Dionysus walks into down there is not water and not a cave. The Greeks pictured a gray country with a river across it and one boatman. Every mortal who ever lived is standing on the far bank of that river. They do not speak, they do not know each other, and nobody looks up. Somewhere in that crowd is Semele, who burned to death in a palace in Thebes. Semele has been in that country as long as her son has been alive. Dionysus has never seen her face because she died before he was born. Down there the boatman takes coins, and the dog at the gate takes nothing. Orpheus came here with a lyre and had to bargain for what he wanted. Heracles came with a club and left with a chain around the neck of the dog. Dionysus comes with no weapon, no lyre, and no argument prepared in advance. Hades is not a god who gives people back, and his country is not open for visits. One tradition says Hades was offered a plant that had not existed before. The myrtle stays green through the winter and grows on the graves of that country. A god who came out of a burnt house paid for his mother with a living branch. Somewhere on that gray bank, Semele turns around because someone has said her name. Semele is the only one in that whole country who has been called by anyone. Semele looks at a grown man she has never met and does not know him. Dionysus tells her who his father was and what she asked to see. They walk back toward the water together, and nobody on the bank follows them. Up in the marsh at Lerna, the surface breaks, and the reeds go over sideways. Semele has been dead for a generation and is standing in the shallows in daylight. Semele puts her hand up against the sun because she cannot look at it yet. Dionysus takes her out of that marsh and up the road toward the hills. Dionysus does not take her back to Thebes, where her sisters called her a liar. Dionysus takes her up, past the tree line, past the snow, to the top of Olympus. The gods in that hall watch a mortal woman come in through the doors. Semele is not a servant, she is not a prize, and she is not asking for shelter. Dionysus gives her a new name at the door, and she keeps it from then on. Thyone walks into the hall of the gods, with ash still in her family's story. Hera watched Thyone come in and did not say anything at all. Hera had ended that girl with a question asked gently in a courtyard in Thebes. Now the girl is standing in her hall as an immortal and cannot be reached. Of all the mortal women in Greek myth, only Semele was taken out of death by her child. Heracles reached Olympus by his own work and burned his mortal half away first. Semele did nothing except believe a man in the dark and ask him to prove it. Dionysus went into the ground and came back up with her, and the rule bent. Now go back to Mount Kithairon and to Pentheus in the branches of a pine. The question at the top of this was why the Greeks feared Dionysus more than Ares. Ares comes with dust on the road and shields on the ridge above a town. A city can see Ares coming for a day and a half before he arrives. It can close the gate, raise the wall, send the children inland, and count its spears. When the fighting is over, the survivors know exactly what happened to them. They bury their dead, they name the enemy, and they tell the story straight. Nothing about Ares is hidden, and nothing about him requires belief to survive. Dionysus never stands on a ridge, and there is nothing to count from the wall. Dionysus walks in through the gate in a traveler's cloak with his hands empty. The soldiers on that wall stay at their posts and see nothing wrong all day. The women of the house put down the wool and walk out the back door. A king gives an order at noon and cannot remember giving it by evening. A mother comes home from a mountain carrying something and asking for praise. Nobody in that story was attacked, and every hand in it belonged to the family. Thebes had walls, 7 gates, and an army, and none of it was ever used. Dionysus came in through the one opening that a city cannot close. Dionysus came in through the minds of the people who were already inside. A spear can be blocked, and a wall can be manned, and a gate can be barred. There is no wall on the inside of a head, and there never was. That is the reason those small altars stood at the edge of Greek towns. Walk out to the edge of any of those towns at the end of the day. There is a low stone by the road with ivy grown thick over the base. A bowl of new wine stands on the flat top of it, poured that evening. Nobody is standing near it, and no one is singing anywhere down that street. The shutters on the nearest house are already closed for the night. A farmer put that bowl down without saying anything and walked home quickly. The farmer was not thanking anyone and was not asking for a good harvest. He was not celebrating, and there was no festival on the calendar that week. He had heard about Lycurgus, about Orchomenus, and about the house of Cadmus. He knew what happened to people who decided Dionysus was a story for women. The wine sits out on that stone through the whole night until first light. In the morning the bowl is empty, and nobody in the house asks why. They fill it again the next evening and put it back on the same stone. They were not bringing Dionysus gifts because they loved him or wanted his festival. They were paying every evening in wine at the edge of town in silence. They were paying Dionysus to keep walking, past the gate, past the vineyard, past the door.